Hi, my name is Gillian Krajewski. I'm from the TCM group and I'm here with TCM group's founder and MD, David Liddle, to interview him about mediation. So thank you for coming, David.
Thank you, Gillian.
And the first question is, what is mediation?
Okay, well, mediation is the intervention of a neutral third party into a conflict or dispute situation. The role of the mediator is to help the two disputing parties come together and find a mutually acceptable, mutually satisfactory outcome. Mediation is an opportunity for people in dispute to talk, to listen to one another, and to find a way of working together which suits both of them, and therefore avoids the need for them to go into a formal grievance process, which is often adversarial. It often exacerbates the conflict, makes the situation worse. Whereas in mediation, what mediation does is it helps perhaps calm the conflict a little, allows the parties to express their concerns, their needs, their goals, express how they feel, listen to one another and find, as mentioned, a way of working which suits both of them.
What are the benefits of using mediation in the NHS?
And the first benefit is it avoids a lot of the stress and the anxiety that people experience when they're in conflict and in difficult situations at work. We see the stress can take many different forms, but within the NHS it can lead to increased absence in the workplace, breakdown in communication and breakdown in relations, and that might be between clinicians, between nurses on wards in clinics and across hospitals and across primary care organisations. So some of the key benefits to mediation are they avoid and prevent some of those situations occurring. Mediation can nip issues in the bud quite quickly and quite effectively and prevent them escalating. But at the other end of the dispute cycle, when perhaps the dispute has gone on for some time and there's very strong emotions and people are feeling very aggrieved, it can bring people together and it can help them find a solution which works for them. So it has a number of benefits. It reduces stress, it gets people talking, it nips issues in the bud. I think another key benefit as well is it's an extremely effective way of resolving conflicts. Research that we've undertaken demonstrates that only 25% of people who go through a formal grievance actually experience a positive outcome. 93% of mediations that we undertake and a number of organisations that we work with undertake actually reach a mutually acceptable solution for the parties. Mediation works.
In a hospital or NHS organisation, who is it who does the mediating?
We've identified three potential individuals or groups who can provide mediation. The first of those are managers and leaders within organisations. Within the NHS, as with many organisations, conflict isn't something that's taught, or conflict resolution isn't necessarily something that's taught within those organisations. So the first step is to train managers and leaders to act as mediators and help resolve conflicts and nip them in the bud. Within many organisations as well, we develop an internal mediation scheme where we train individuals to act as peer mediators in the workplace. We train them up to an accredited standard, to a professional standard, and they will then work to resolve disputes within the organisation through a coordinated body. So the first step is to train managers and leaders, the second step is to train a group of independent internal mediators. The third group of mediators we often find are external third parties, such as ourselves, where we're called into an organisation, often in disputes which are very complex. That might involve some discrimination issues, it may involve multiple parties, but having access to external third-party mediators, people who do this for a day job, can be very valuable for NHS organisations.
So where an NHS organisation has its own set of internal mediators, how do they get chosen for the role? Okay,
well, when we're working with NHS organisations, one of the key messages is that actually anyone within that organisation can be a mediator, from clinicians, nursing staff, right the way through to porters and others within the organisation. So what we look to do is develop a multidisciplinary team of mediators. That gives the mediation team credibility, and it also ensures that there are individuals within the mediation team who understand the culture and ethos of the organisation. We've developed a set of core competencies for mediators, and around those core competencies we've developed a training programme. That training programme is fully accredited by the Open College Network, and that ensures that the mediators who are being trained are working to a professional standard and undertake qualification as part of that. I think another key message to mention here is that the mediators undergo regular continuing professional development CPD, and that's offered within the organisation, and that will focus on more complex issues. How they're chosen, the organisation will go through an interview process, there's an application process. I think one of the key messages is taken very seriously. And whilst anyone in the organisation can be a mediator, not everyone necessarily is equipped and enabled to be able to mediate in their own organisation. So going through a process, a recruitment process, can really help find the right people that the organisation needs.
As you know, the NHS is going through major changes at the moment. How does mediation fit into the midst of all of that?
That's a very interesting question, Gillian, and you're absolutely right, the NHS is going through major change at the moment. Change and conflict are inextricably linked. Where there's change, there's conflict, and often where there's conflict, there's change, and we think about conflict resolution as a transformative process. It brings about real and lasting change. I think within the NHS, using mediation to help bring people together to discuss the change, the impact of the change, their vision for the change, actually can be a very powerful way of engaging people in that process, to help people feel part of the change. And where, of course, change creates conflict, and we know that change can create conflict, mediation can be a very powerful way of helping to resolve those issues quickly, because those conflicts can often undermine the change. The very things that the management and others within the organisation wish to implement can be undermined, and research shows that actually conflict can be one of the major reasons why change isn't implemented effectively, or people don't engage with change. So building a mediation or a mediated approach into the change process, training change agents in mediation skills, building it into the change programme, allowing people to have their voice during change and mediating disputes quickly, could be a very powerful and effective way of supporting the NHS through this period of transformation and change across the whole of the organisation.
If I work in the NHS, how can I get involved with mediation?
In the first way is obviously to look at becoming a trained mediator, which we've discussed. There's a whole range of other activities that people can get involved in. The first one is that we normally set up a steering group or some kind of a body within the trust to coordinate the mediation scheme, so there's an opportunity to be involved in that. We run roadshows throughout the organisation promoting mediation, so people coming along to those roadshows, finding out more, or actually joining the roadshows to share their experiences of conflict, to share their experiences of mediation. Obviously, another way of being involved is actually engaging with the mediation process, and I think if there are people within organisations who are experiencing conflict, who are stressed, who are finding it difficult to come to work, who are feeling anxious about their relationship with a colleague, with their manager, they can also get involved by finding out more about mediation and perhaps taking that first, often tentative but quite courageous step towards using a mediation service. I think the other area to be involved in is for people to tell their story. So when people have experienced mediation, the best way to promote mediation is for people to realise it's not a scary process, it's something which is very valuable and important. And so telling their stories and sharing their experiences of mediation can be very valuable as well.
David, you mentioned earlier that mediation really does work. I'm wondering specifically what happens at the end of a mediation meeting for those who've taken part.
Well, of course, at the end of the mediation process, the parties have worked extremely hard, and mediation tends to last for one full day. So as we approach the end of the mediation, we're into what we call the problem-solving phase or the action planning phase. And it's during that phase where the parties start to identify some outcomes and some agreements. Those are recorded often in writing. And it's really up to the parties what happens with that. It tends to be signed by both parties at the end of the mediation process. But of course, mediation is absolutely confidential. So one of the questions that we'll ask the parties as mediators is, does anyone need to see this agreement? Does anyone need to be aware of what you've agreed? That might be a manager, an HR professional or someone else. So we have that discussion and it's agreed what the status of the agreement is. Mediation then ends with a handshake. It often ends with a hug. It certainly ends with a different relationship between the parties. And of course what we hope is the following morning is the parties can then enact what they've agreed that day in the mediation. And that often starts with saying good morning to each other or acknowledging each other in some way and building the relationship up from there. Of course, mediation doesn't end there, and the mediator's role doesn't end there either. The mediator will provide follow-up and support to the parties for as long as they need, but it can often be up to 1 full year after mediation concludes. The mediators will contact the parties at regular intervals. Usually after a month we'll make contact again just to see how it's going, make sure that it's working okay, and just to ensure that there's no minor tweaks or amendments that need to be made to the agreement. We can continue that follow-up for as long as it's required, and of course the parties can contact the mediators as well. What we don't want to do is build a reliance on the mediator. So the mediator is very clear in trying to empower the parties to go and implement what they've agreed. So a large part of the mediator's role in supporting parties after mediation is giving them the confidence and empowering them to go and have difficult conversations back in the workplace without building a reliance on that mediator. But we believe that our role is to support the parties and be there for them, to support them when they need it.
How is it that mediation is different from the kinds of approaches to conflict that people might be more familiar with?
Okay, well, mediation differs from other approaches in a number of ways. I think the first thing to say is that it's a voluntary process, so people enter into mediation because they want to, of their own volition. I don't suppose anyone ever really truly wants to enter into mediation, but what we ask the parties to do is to be willing to give it a go, to come in with an open mind. It's a confidential process. What makes mediation very different is the parties come into it in good faith. They have a without prejudice conversation. It sounds a bit legalistic, but what that means is what's said in the room stays in the room. All of the notes from the mediation are destroyed at the end of mediation in front of the parties. There's no record of mediation kept, apart from the agreement that the parties reach, and even that remains confidential between the parties. Mediation is non-adversarial, and what we mean by that is the parties are able to come into an approach which is building a consensus between themselves, where they can talk to each other without needing to blame the other person, to find a judgment on the other person. And that brings me to the final point, is that the mediator's role is quite different to other roles. We're not there to judge, we're not there to blame, we're not there to find fault. We are there to help the parties listen, to communicate and find a way of working. And that differs radically from perhaps other people's experiences. But it's a very highly effective approach if people are willing to give it a go.
David, thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.
If you're interested to know more about the field of mediation, you can visit the TCM website, where there are lots of resources, and that's at thetcmgroup.com.